Today, we're going to turn this 90 by 45 by 45 Enclosure tank into this. First of all, we started by putting tape on the back of the tank, so we know how far down we can go with the expanding foam to save us from using more than we need to, and then it also saves more cutting down the line. We then got a bunch of wood and figured out the placements at the back of the tank. Personally, I love this circle cork bark. We had this idea to make it sort of look like a mini tunnel so that they can climb into it and gain more height and give it more enrichment. You'll see at the end of the video what goes into this amazing tank. The expanding foam we'll be using is Sodal gap filling foam. I think it took us around 2 750ml cans to finish this project. Unfortunately though, the spray foam is white, but it's cheaper than buying the black spray foam, but I'll probably switch to the black in the future. We then started to foam the whole background. It takes around 2 hours to dry completely, so we're confident we could just do the full backing of the tank to save time. After that, we added all the bits of wood we had. I started by putting the cork bark tunnel idea that I mentioned. Looking back on it, I probably pushed the bark too much into the expanding foam, as later down the line it doesn't really become a tunnel and just sort of a small ledge. I also then added some more bark around that. Then the main centerpiece of this tank. It's a nice big bit of wood sticking out from the back and going to the front of the tank. I like this idea because it would sort of split the tank up, with the left side having more of a wooden area and then the right side having more plants. I also added a little bit more spray foam around it just to make it look a bit more realistic and add more anchor points to the wood. Doing it this way means I can probably add more moss on top of these little ledges, and again it just makes it look more realistic. After we added that big bit of wood in, I then added some more bark around the back. Looking back on this, I kind of wish I added more and bigger bits. After that dried, it was time to do the right side of the tank. I wanted to make it look like bits of wood coming out of the edges of the tank. I think it makes it look more realistic, but also adds a bit more depth into the design. I wanted this right side wall to have not only the bit of wood like I said, but just more bark on the right side so I could then put more moss and whatever really I wanted over on that side. This right side of the tank actually was one of my favourite sides because moss ends up growing quite well in it later down the line. As you can see, that's probably not my hand. I let my girlfriend add these bits of wood as I was getting really annoyed with the placement of them. Once we added the cork to the back of the right side, we then added some driftwood. The placement of this was pretty tricky, but I wanted it to look like it was sort of like coming out of the background in like a foresty type setup. I don't really know how to explain it, but my vision was there and it turned out pretty much exactly how I envisioned it. This is what it looks like when everything's been dried. Overall, I really do like the right side, but I wish I added more bark to the back of the right side. So after everything dried, we then start up on the left side of the tank. The left side of the tank is super simple. Just again, spray foaming it all, putting a little bit of bark and a little bit more driftwood coming out. You can see that I pushed the driftwood too much into the expanding foam. I do this too much in this whole build in general, to be honest. I should have just let it sat on top of the spray foam and sort of naturally foamed around it instead of pushing it in, because later down the line it makes it more difficult to cut and makes it look a little bit less natural. So once everything dried, we now have to cut the whole background. Cutting the whole background means that silicone can stick to it a lot easier, and also you can get more texture and it just looks a bit better. There was two different ways we did this. We started off by using a knife on the left side of the tank. The knife made it a little bit easier to like cut, but overall we ended up changing for the picking method, which is basically just getting your nails, and just picking off bits of foam. It gives it more texture that way. It means that you can get all the shiny bits of spray foam off easier, meaning again the silicone will stick to it easier. The silicone that we used was HA6 Bonded brown silicone. This stuff is 100% silicone, which is exactly what you want when you're building something like this. And then all you do is put a layer of silicone all over the expanding foam where you cut. You can use a brush, a sponge. We started to use a sponge at the start, but then we actually ended up switching to makeup brushes just because it's a lot easier. But in another video in the future that you'll see, we end up using a knife to sort of spread silicone all over it, and it actually worked out kind of better. After putting on the silicone and then spreading it out, we then put on the fern fiber. So what I'm using here is just tree fern fiber. It's not as thick as the current bag that we actually have. It's actually, this one's more like granular, which I'm not a huge fan of. I wish it was thicker pieces and there was more like fern in the actual substrate, but it still worked. And yeah, we just continued to add tree fern fiber to the whole thing with silicone under it, and we did it in parts rather than doing it as one because the silicone only takes about like 15-20 minutes to dry. After that, we brushed off any tree fern fiber that was kind of loose or inside places that we didn't want it. And overall, I actually think it looked pretty cool. But like I said, I wish we had thicker bits of tree fern fiber rather than the more granular parts. After that, I gave it a quick mist down just to make sure that there was nothing that I missed or anything was like leaking or just anything like that. In hindsight, I probably should have done this before, but it is what it is. For the drainage layer, I used Zoom Ed Hydro Ball. I used quite a lot of these actually, and in hindsight it made the build really heavy. I wish I went for something a bit lighter, but that's what we went for. I washed all the dust off as well just to make sure there wasn't any, well, dust. For the barrier between the clay balls and the substrate, I went for just a premium hydro matting one off of Swell Reptiles. Everything will be linked below, by the way. It was really cheap. It was only £3 and I got a lot of it. It was about a meter, I think I ended up getting of it. After that, it was time to add the substrate. For the bottom layer of the substrate, I used the tree fern fiber and then I put cocoa fiber on the top of that. I realized that cocoa fiber isn't the best, but it's what we had at that point to do this build. And in future, I do end up using a completely different substrate. After putting the substrate down, it was time to start planting and putting in little rocks and just stuff like that. The left side of the tank, I wanted it to make it accessible to get up onto this cork ground. So I put a bit of driftwood that allows you to go up onto that little bit of cork. We also added moss around the cork. Then also put a vining plant on the back left so it would sort of then droop over the cork bark on the left side. I like the look of this a lot and I think it's actually one of the best bits in this build. But yeah, after planting everything, this is what we had. After that, we added some dwarf white isopods. After a few weeks of letting the tank settle down a little bit, we then added some leaf litter and some other things, and overall this was sort of the finished product. But I want to show you the final version of the tank about 2 months later. It's about a month and a half, 2 months. Some plants have died, some plants have grown. Yeah, I just want to show you guys the final product. But yeah, here's the tank about 2 months later. Everything in the tank is just doing extremely well. There's a couple of things that have died, and there's a couple of things that are struggling to grow in this tank. But you can see the right side here. The right side is just, it's crazy the growth this right side of the tank has actually had. You can see that it's starting to get a bit overgrown, to be honest. And you can see there's a little guy right there. But yeah, she's really enjoying the tank. She's getting more bolder as the plants started growing, and she's really just enjoying exploring. Overall, I'm really happy with the tank. I think there's some stuff that I'd like to change. You can see in the back left that that plant actually died that was going around the cork bark. That was difficult to keep alive. But yeah, overall, I'm fairly happy with it. And you see the springtails hard at work, making sure that everything's broken down. And yeah, these guys are actually, I'd say overpopulating actually. There's a lot of them. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that subscribe button and also like the video so you don't miss out on future builds. I'll be doing a Bumblebee Dartfog Vivarium very soon, so yeah, make sure you don't miss out on that.